Hi, everyone. Welcome to Education for Flourishing, Pursuing Purpose in the Professions. This webinar is part of Virtues and Vocations, a national forum housed at the Center for Social Concerns at the University of Notre Dame for scholars and practitioners across disciplines to consider how best to cultivate character in pre-professional and professional education. This initiative is funded through a generous grant from the Kern Family Foundation. I am Suzanne Shanahan, and I direct the Center for Social Concerns. I am also host for this series. At any point during the program, you can submit questions through the Q&A function in Zoom, and we will turn to those questions around 12:40. Be assured that there is a backstage team that will address any technical difficulties that arise. And with that, we are delighted to welcome educator Dr. Karen Bohlin on why practical wisdom matters. Dr. Bohlin is a recognized thought leader in applied virtue ethics and character education. She is currently the director of the Practical Wisdom Project at the Abigail Adams Institute in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But just to stay busy, she is also a senior scholar at Boston University's Center for Character and Social Responsibility and Director Emerita of BU's Center for the Advancement of Ethics and Character. She has served as an assistant professor of education and then as head of school at Montrose in Medfield, Massachusetts, where she founded the Life Compass Institute for Character and Leadership, a lab school community of practice. Karen is a veteran educator at the middle, secondary, and university levels. She has worked with state departments and ministries of education around the world. She is co-architect of the National Schools of Character program, a sabbatical fellow at the Jubilee Center for Character and Virtues in the UK. She's an editorial reviewer and contributor to the Journal of Character Education and the Journal of Education. And most recently, she led the Kern Partners and Character and Educational Leadership. Karen's work focuses on educating leaders in practical wisdom so they may shape institutions committed to individual and collective human flourishing. Welcome, Karen. We're excited to talk about practical wisdom today with one of its most renowned scholars and enthusiastic advocates.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Great to have you here. What we're hoping today is to have a pretty open-ended conversation where we might talk about the trajectory of your thought and work as a 30-year educator and really one of the founders and leaders of the current character education movement worldwide. Okay, if we jump right in?
Sure, of course.
So character seems to be quite fashionable in the United States right now after a bit of time away. But you've been at it for 30 years. Can you share how you came to the work of education and then where your interest in character in particular came from?
Sure. I think, gosh, I've been in it for more than 30 years. I've been in it for a lifetime, and I'm still very much a work in progress. I think it's that messiness of life that confronts us with our vulnerability and our imperfections and the need to keep on working and beginning again. But it really was as a high school teacher where I of course you fall in love with the kids, but I thought I was just going to share my passion for literature. I thought I was going to teach them how to write and perform scenes from Shakespeare and it just be inspired to learn to communicate and read on levels that would just expand their thoughts and horizons. And then I was confronted with all of the myriad challenges and questions and concerns that middle and high school students bring to the classroom, from their family to their fears about speaking in front of a group, to their desire to fit in. And it was in navigating all of those social concerns and personal needs that were really sometimes standing in the way of their ability to learn, that I saw firsthand, the whole person enterprise of character education. And I I think too, had a student who sophomore year in high school just had this real tepid acquaintance with English class. And the only time she participated was when she could relate it to a particular um, series she had been watching. And she wanted to go with us on a trip abroad to the UK, this literary theater tour. So we had established a minimum grade point average and that the students had to raise a certain amount of money so that they would really own participation in the trip, do some research and presentations. And this child just squeaked by, just met all of the requirements. And frankly, I kind of lacked the confidence. I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be a real challenge. She's going to be so distracted. And she asked, when can I go back to the room? There were no cell phones then. When will I be able to watch my soap opera? When will we have time to shop? All of those questions that make anyone who's planning this like dynamic, culturally rich literary theater tour, it's kind of soul crushing. And in fact, she had a huge transformation on that trip. And that occurred in the Tower of London in this evening ceremony of the keys. We were enveloped in fog, and she just watched this ancient year-old ceremony and saw where we were and had so many questions. And a light just went on. And she said to me, Miss Bohlin, I'm never going to watch soap operas again. I mean, it was incredible. But it's these epiphanies aren't just isolated. There's something that contributes to this building, to this change. But I did see a young woman go back and start a literary magazine, become business editor of the yearbook, give up television. And she went on to found a school like the school she had graduated from, Montrose School. She started a preschool. She interviewed board members to learn how to do that. She became very successful in business. She married, had a child, became a board member in the school where I was head of school. And then at the very precious age of 31, died suddenly of an aneurysm. And 2,000 people came to her funeral. It was just this incredible witness to the impact of someone whose desires are awakened and schooled in a way that all of a sudden they just start pursuing the good at every turn in their friendships and their family and their work. And to me, that's sort of the fruit and the roots of character education. How do we school desire? There's so many things that young people can be attracted to, waylaid by, but that's really where it is. And just seeing those lights go on my own journey with students and with families was important.
As you think of that story, how do you connect that schooling of desire to character? And is that different than connecting it to ethics? You've worked in kind of both ethics and character, and how does that all go together for you?
Sure. So, ethics is it's that branch of philosophy that's really, it's much more of that intellectual inquiry into what is the right, moral, just thing. Character is who we are. It's our habits and disposition that we've cultivated over time, and we can continue to build our character. Our choices reveal our character. And we're not defined by our worst choices. We're defined by how we respond, shake off the dust, and begin again. So character is that combination of habits and dispositions that people can notice, how we predictably respond in our kindness and our thoughtfulness and our considered responses. And ethics is more of that branch of philosophy. And
Right.
character education is the schooling of desire. That's just something I've really committed to sticking a claim in and some of my early scholarship and writing, because I think sometimes character education can be reductive, too much focus on just behavior modification. Of course, our behavior, how we treat each other matters. But when we're looking at what is the enterprise of shaping someone's character, we're really trying to plant those seeds of that desire of becoming a particular kind of person, and to ask ourselves, who am I and who do I aspire to be for others? How do I aspire to contribute to this world? What are the unique talents and gifts I've been given? Who am I called to become? And in thinking about that internal world of motivation and intrinsic motivation, what's so important for educators, and inclusive, obviously, of parents, is to be thinking about our children's loves, from the company that keep in literature and film, who do they aspire to be like, to the way they spend their time, their talent and energy, what appetites is it cultivating, and to, what is it that they think about and care about. So we know what happens when we are just consumed by Fortnite. I know a story of a little boy who left school. They didn't know where he went. He went home in the middle of the day to play Fortnite. That's where his parents found him. So there's a lot of things that capture our attention, our desire, that can lead us to rationalize choices that are not conducive to our flourishing. Think about road rage, bullying, white collar crime. These are all abuses of power when our ambitions go unchecked and we just pursue what we want because we want it, and the end justifies the means. So the schooling of desire is about effectively reflecting on, what am I aiming at and why? Is it good for me? Is it good for others? Is it good for my family, the school community I'm a part of? And how do we as educators make it attractive?
Great. Yeah, one of your early books talked about character in literature, and clearly you were a teacher of literature. How do you school desire through literature, and how do you think about that role that books, fiction, literature plays?
Sure. And by extension, film, poetry, and there's so much in that right-brained world where we kind of see lives and experience vicariously the lives of others. And so for me, that book, Teaching Character Education Through Literature, Awakening the Moral Imagination in secondary and post-secondary classrooms, is about 4 novels widely taught at the secondary level. Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Are Watching God, Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby, and Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. So in that particular book, which is really, it has these great theoretical underpinnings, but it's a teacher's guide because it has long excerpts from the novels. And I use the novels to really conduct a qualitative case studies. What is the moral journey of these characters? Not what do we think about the moral journey of these, what does it look like? Novelists are great psychological portrait painters. They're the ones who bring us into the thinking, the motivation, the context of characters' lives. So I was motivated to write a book that would give teachers some of the questions and lenses that really engage readers with the text, that really invite them to linger on passages and ask questions about what's going on here. So if we look at those morally pivotal points in the lives of characters in literature, we can see the relationships at work, relationships not only of love and friendship, but those of aversion. We can see these characters' reflections on what's happening, what's going on in their lives. We can see what they take pleasure in, what they find painful and difficult. And we can see when they have the courage to act based on their reflections and when they resist and why. And so all four of those factors, courage to take action based on reflection, the capacity for reflection, relationships, making sense of pleasures and pains, they're all at work in morally pivotal points. They're all present. And that's true in Janie, in Their Eyes Are Watching God, Elizabeth Bennet, Sidney Carton. They're absent in Jay Gatsby. Gatsby is the negative case study. It's fascinating because he's wholly unreflective. His relationships, even Nick Carraway, they don't have any impact on him. His relationship with Daisy is kind of mono. It's this obsession. One could argue he's a stalker, right? He doesn't question. He doesn't even respond to any of Daisy's challenges. So he doesn't grow. You don't see a change. He is the Platonic conception of himself, and he kind of stays that way. But the beauty of using literature, it really, the first thing a teacher needs to do is to be sure that the students are engaged with it, enjoying the story. We don't want to sort of beat a moral lesson out of it. We want to raise questions that engage them in some reflection on the moral journey of these characters, but really, allow them to empathetically enter in, or as Harper Lee puts it in To Kill a Mockingbird, to give them the experience of walking in another person's skin or shoes. And I think literature widens our experiences, it widens our perspective, deepens our imagination. And this is why it's important to have a diet of literature that's not just billboard literature, that's not sort of challenging you to think or engage in big questions, or even enter into the psychology or reflections of the character. So if it's just sort of superficial, it's not going to have the same impact,
Right. As you reflect on that book, if you were to write it today, would you have the same selections, or are there other things that you've reflected on over the years where you thought, oh, this would just be fabulous?
It's so true. I get this question a lot. It was just translated into Spanish. So I've been getting these inquiries to even do a book club with Spanish students, Spanish-speaking students in English on these novels. But I would like to do something on science fiction. And I think that there are these fabulous dystopian novels that have captured the attention of young people. And what's so cool about them is that even if you just think of, okay, now I'm dating myself, it's old and not even Hunger Games, Divergent. If you just look at well, there's some films, science fiction that's captured our attention too, that's I'd be interested in looking at. But if you look at Lois Lowry's The Giver, if you look at the classic Fahrenheit 451, what's happening in all of these science fiction novels? We are reduced. We're not complex and multidimensional. In Hunger Games, you're reduced to the district, what you produce. In Divergent, you're reduced to a monolithic version of your temperament. The dauntless jump from the trains, the benevolent are always good. The threat to society is the person who's divergent, who has understandings and sympathies and temperament, so strengths that cut across all. And I think this and our polarized culture yeah, in our polarized media, and I don't just mean politically polarized. I mean, there's so much reductionism and labeling. And what these science fiction novels do is they show, the danger of this, like how we lose our humanity. Going back to The Giver, you're reduced to roles you play. Everyone is very neutral. You can't speak about emotion. The need to look at our humanity in all its fullness and to wonder about it and to leverage it in dialogue, in peace building, in diplomacy is so important. And so I would love to do some sort of parallel study with science fiction, because there's a reason young people are attracted to it. And the heroes and heroines of these pieces have a message.
Wonderful. At the Montrose School, where you were head of school for quite some time, is inspired by Catholic social teaching. Can you talk a little bit about how that has influenced your thinking and your work, sort of where that fits in, if at all, in your work on character?
Well, I think that being the head of a school with a distinctive mission is always a privilege. And we know that organizations and institutions that are bold, that have noble missions, that are authentically true to who they are really formative. And there are many formative institutions that are not faith-based. You can be a formative institution drawing on other sources of wisdom, but are focused on flourishing, and high performance, and creating and shaping cultures that help people to thrive. And that's really the core of the larger character education work. Being in a school that's inspired by the teachings of the Catholic Church gives you that rich dimensionality of looking at dignity in the fullest understanding of every person being a child of God and called to greatness in this life and eternally. Having a sense of widening one's circle of concern and caring about those in need, those less fortunate, being called to serve and live a real servant leadership. It has deep Christian anthropological understandings when you look at that from the Catholic tradition. So I would say that it gave a deep anchor and just sort of a richer tradition on which to educate young people. And certainly at Montrose, we had students and families of all different traditions, including those who came from faith traditions that were not Christian, but they did share and appreciate a respect for faith, a respect for the transcendent. I really support a lot of the work and research in spirituality and education, which is very different from a shared faith tradition. Both are important, but we do need to acknowledge that human beings have transcendent desires, a transcendent purpose and yearning, and part of the existential crisis that young people experience today is a crisis of meaning. So it's really incumbent on us as educators to be sure we facilitate and encounter with not only rich wisdom traditions, encourage people to explore and deepen their faith tradition, certainly to be in a school where you could speak openly about having a personal relationship with God. That is a gift to those many alumni around the world who are parents and surgeons and lawyers and working as Doctors Without Borders and artists and performers in different and difficult circumstances, that they're grateful that they nurtured that spiritual side of their life and have some context for understanding not just what the Catholic Church teaches, but why and who they are. And they're free to evolve that, to deepen that, even to walk away and rebel from that. But it's a foundation. So it was a great privilege to be a part of that community for that time and to support in education in a faith-based environment.
Great. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what you're up to now as director of the Practical Wisdom Project. And I want to start with a pretty straightforward question, which is, what is practical wisdom? I hear it everywhere, and yet when I hear it, I think I'm hearing different things. So practical wisdom from the expert. What are we talking about here?
Well, Aristotle's really instructive, and so I am going to lean on him. So practical wisdom, or phronesis, is an intellectual virtue. It's a particular type of wisdom. So in book 6 of his Ethics, Aristotle says there's 3 types of wisdom. The first is theoretical wisdom. It's a way of knowing. It's knowing aimed at understanding scientific principles, foundations. Practical wisdom is that way of knowing aimed at taking action. And but not just taking any action willy-nilly. Remember, these are types of wisdom. There's an implicit good for the human person. So it's action that is the right action at the right time for the right reason. And that implies deliberation, planning, reflection, seeking counsel. But it is action oriented. And just to give the full context, the third type of wisdom is productive wisdom, or art, that's aimed at creating, doing, making, performing. We need, as human beings, all 3 types. Practical wisdom is really important in the professions and in ordinary life, because in day-to-day life, and certainly in a school as a parent, we have to adjudicate competing goods. In school, in disciplinary issues, we adjudicate justice and mercy. We're also making what is the right thing for a child in the 4th grade who is afraid of math and keeps forgetting his homework, versus a sophomore in high school who's cutting class. How we adjudicate, how we're responsive to the contextual needs matters. But I'll going back to your definition, intellectual virtue, but that's deceiving. Because practical wisdom really aligns the head and the heart, so we can execute with know-how and motivation. So it's intelligent, it's practical, it's action-oriented. And Aristotle adds, we acquire it through through teaching and experience. So it's that virtue that's developed in apprenticeship, in context. My short definition of practical wisdom that my colleagues and I use and socialize, it's knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. You know how to activate that, all of that quick deliberation. You're like bringing together experience and knowledge, but your aim is always noble. You're aiming at bringing out the best in yourself, in others, and in the organization you serve if you're in a leadership position.
Wonderful. That's fantastic. Yeah, huge clarity there. Could you talk a little bit about what the Practical Wisdom Project is hoping to achieve? What are its core goals?
Sure. I think that I see practical wisdom as the core DNA of formative leadership. We have a lot of institutions that are very clear on their mission and values. They have them beautifully presented on their websites. They have view books and posters, and leaders give visionary speeches about what they value and how they put people first. And yet operationalizing those values can be quite difficult. And people will default to compliance, or they'll default to fear-based reactions. And so what we're looking to do is to promote leadership education. I do executive education for leadership teams from formative institutions like schools and public charter schools, public schools committed to character education, committed to citizenship, private schools, NGOs, nonprofits, small businesses. What we're aiming to help them do is to activate the skills and habits and practices at the heart of practical wisdom. And so we have a framework for teaching practical wisdom that leaders can model, coach, and teach. It's called the Practical Wisdom Framework. I've outlined that in the Journal of Education article, if that's useful for folks to take a look at. But essentially, we walk them through a 4-step process that's simple because it's accessible and you can call it up real time, like that leadership compass in your pocket, when you're in a crisis or you're under pressure. But it's not simplistic because it's also deep. It has deep theoretical underpinnings and an understanding of human flourishing, an understanding of virtue ethics, neuroscience, teaching and learning. And it's also powerful because we can scale it internally simply by modeling it, coaching it, and teaching it. And so bringing that program to as many people as possible. We have a cohort now, and then developing shorter workshops around areas of it, practicing courageous dialogue and giving feedback and performance review, practicing reflective listening. There's a lot of components to the program itself. People have asked for a program on leadership coaching and mentoring, mentoring students, mentoring adults you supervise, keeping practical wisdom as the core. Because if practical wisdom is the core, it's always going to ensure that the decisions we make, whether it's just a day-to-day decision on operations, or it's how we deal with a crisis communication, those decisions are always going to be aimed at bringing out the best in ourselves, in others, in the organizations we serve. It's going to have flourishing, individual and collective flourishing as its end. That's why we need this compass to kind of navigate the really, gosh, an incredibly changing and pressurized landscape of today.
Great. As you think about the work you're doing, one of the things you made a really important point that practical wisdom is something that is essentially learned through experience, learned through, in Aristotle's term, through apprenticeships. How do you enable people to practice this, right? So you do workshops. Is it focused on the how of this or the why of this, or how do you bring them together?
Yeah, it's the what, the why, and the how. I think it's first, we focus on leadership education because in order to transform cultures and shape communities that serve people, whether those people are adults or students and children, we need to focus on building that leadership capacity first. And I'm using leadership in the non-positional sense, not just someone who's the top dog, the highest paid CEO. No. Anyone responsible for creating and shaping a culture, on forming and coaching others. So we need that the theory of change is not just work with the adults, but work with the leadership teams so we can scale a shared approach. So what we're aiming at is a model of decision-making that enables a model of decision-making that enables you to focus on flourishing as well as high performance in every decision. Why is this important? Because we are, particularly in education, we're not making widgets, we're educating human beings. And our example and our decisions teach far more than the beautiful words we have printed on the wall. And so kids are looking at how we respond in a crisis, how we treat someone in a disciplinary issue, how we reclaim our cool and apologize if we've lost our temper. That's what matters the most. So why we want to model an good character is fundamental. And how we do it is with this leadership compass, the practical wisdom framework that really enables you to pull up some guiding questions in real time, in context, bring the right people to the table so you can reassess, what are we aiming at? What do we know? What do we need to know? Who can help? But it does more than that, because it encourages you to press pause under the stress and pressure when everyone's reacting and freaking out, and know what to do there. Because if we don't acknowledge those first reactions and give people a hearing and make sure that they're seen and they're understood, we can't move into that messy space of reflection and building and problem solving productively, because it'll just be coercion. So the practical wisdom framework is all about being phenomenologically present to the people and the situation. Really, it's the three components are you're attentive to context of people and circumstances, you're honoring and engaging the agency of everyone involved, not just telling them what to do, bringing them on board, understanding where they're coming from, building trust, and rallying them around aims, so that when people have different and competing aims, we're listening and we're looking at all of them, but we're going to adjudicate together based on some of our shared higher aims as a community and as individuals. So there's a definite what, why, how. We look at it from the point of view of the institution and its true north. We look at it from the point of view of the academic program or whatever program an organization is delivering. We look at it from the point of view of HR. We look at it from the point of view of problem solving and disciplinary issues and performance review, so that it's really integrated into context. But the simplicity of it is you're using the same compass in different contexts. So that's what makes it scalable and replicable and builds habits and practices on the team, so that if one person's more impulsive, one person's more thoughtful, the practices bring everyone to a place of pausing and constructive dialogue.
Great. I'm wondering if, as you go through your life as an expert on practical wisdom, do you see individuals who you're like, yeah, they got it, and other individuals who you're like, oof, they need a little practical wisdom? Is it something that, right, you just bring with you everywhere you go and you can see it both in its practice and its absence? As an expert, is that something?
You can definitely see it in its practice and its absence. There's no question about that. It's like, and I think that my motivation in this third chapter of my professional work is that I wanted to make explicit and mentor leaders and educators and parents, make explicit that best of what we do see in other people. Why is it that they have that know-how and that savvy, not the kind of savvy and cleverness to do whatever they want, whenever they want, but it's aimed at making good decisions. How do we tap into that? And for someone who's less inclined, how do we make it more explicit? I mean, so we have created the scaffolding, if you will, that helps you develop practices at the core of the virtue of prudence, right? One of the 4 cardinal virtues. And it's so important because it's the core DNA of every virtue. It's what helps you illuminate and adjudicate the golden mean when you have 2 extremes and many options in between. But we do have to activate it. And if we go on my assumption of what Aristotle is talking about when he says teaching and experience, then we do need to teach, and we need to teach it in the context of the experience of the professional work. We need to teach it in medical school, when we're rounding. We need to teach it in pre-practicums and teacher education. We need to teach it when we're coaching students after they've had a big mistake or mess up. And we need to teach it to our colleagues. So that's what our work at the Practical Wisdom Project and the framework that I teach is all about, providing scaffolding so that professionals can practice those skills at the heart of this great virtue of practical wisdom in the context of their professional work.
In your experience, is it something you actually see people get better at? And are there things people bring to the table that enables them to be better or worse at it?
It's a great question. I haven't, collected that data. I do have colleagues who have collected some field data from sort of the users, the primary users of the practical wisdom framework. And it's interesting what they notice and articulate is that it helps them, one, to grow in their own personal virtues and virtues of humility and willingness to be curious and listen more, to grow in the courage to take a risk and take some action when you don't know what to do, the willingness to, so that personal growth in virtue is really significant. And what I see so that those are people who are using the practical wisdom framework. What I see of people who have practical wisdom, they're great listeners. They want to understand. They're very curious. They want to know what's going on. They're not paralyzed by their perfectionism. They're willing to take action, but they do ask good questions and know in complex professional situations, we need to they know how to ask for advice or counsel and bring the right people to the table. They're not just knee-jerk or quick in their expediting a response. And it's hardwired within them. They seem to be practiced. They're very good at reading context. They are very good at listening to all the possible aims, but they raise and challenge people to lift their sights higher. And they're comfortable holding 2 or more things together at the same time in tension. Those are some of the things I've observed from people with practical wisdom, and they're patient. They're patient with themselves and other people, because what matters is making the right decision at the right time for the right reasons. And they're not afraid to make a mistake, because you can learn from that mistake and pick up from it. So that's that's a great book, right? The Most Practically Wise People I Know.
Yeah. Great. Okay, I'm going to start turning to some of the questions which are queuing up. The first one is actually 2 questions, and it starts with Alistair McIntyre. Also talks about transformation of desire, as well as the importance of narrative in literature and in life. What have you found helpful in the schooling of a desire in helping people to grow and transform their desires?
Well, see, Alistair McIntyre, what a giant. And he was a huge inspiration to me when I was doing my doctoral dissertation. So the idea of narrative, and that the moral life is like a story, an unfolding narrative. We're living in a great drama. And he says the central question of our life is not simply um, who who I ought to be, but of what story or stories do I find myself a part? So I think that narrative, not just the literary stories, but the stories of family and friends and chapters in our lives that we reflect on and try to intentionally connect the dots on and think and contemplate about. So we're really doing good sense making is really powerful. Of course, Charles Taylor, many others have talked about the importance of narrative and understanding our life. And that's why I think literature is so important and story is so important, because it's so resonant. We're hardwired for stories. We receive them, we remember them. And I think it's important as parents and educators and professors that we feed a good diet of narrative to our students. And McIntyre also speaks about tradition and practice, both of which I think are really important, both in practical wisdom and character education, that we come from rich and storied traditions, intellectual traditions, faith traditions, cultural, ethnic traditions. Again, they just give so much color and nuance to our lives and our experience. So exploring them and being sure that we encourage young people to explore them in their fullness is important to feeding the whole soul. And then finally, practice. That's about apprenticeship. He talks about what are the internal goods of a practice. It's been a long time since I read After Virtue, but those internal goods and I think that's really part of what's happening in practical wisdom is you're learning the internal goods of being a better math teacher and soccer coach, but practical, it's not just, it doesn't just end there. Those internal goods are aimed at bringing out the best in yourself and in others. It has that noble purpose, that noble aim, not just a pragmatic one.
Great. This person had a second question, which is, can you talk about the role of the schooling of desire of direct service experiences in which a young person, ideally with close mentoring, connects with people grappling with concrete life challenges?
So let me be sure I understand how a mentor can help a young person dealing with concrete life challenges.
Well, I think it's about the role of direct service experiences in the schooling of desire. I don't know if that's something you can speak to.
So service as in volunteer service.
Yeah, I think that's what it.
I'm also thinking of the service industry. I spent a lot of my time waiting tables. So I think that's a huge schooling of desire and a huge, I have this secret, it's not a secret desire. I would kind of love to bring the practical wisdom framework and the schooling of desire to people in the hospitality industry, because I think it's such hard work. It's such important people-centered work. And we want to make it not just something that's exhausting and burnout. But okay, so any service work is people-centered work. And there is a risk right now of losing our true north, of just feeling like we're giving and there's not a lot of opportunity to recover. So whether that's teaching, any healthcare profession, taking care of elderly parents or sick people, like we do have to keep coming back to, why am I doing this? And what is the beauty of this work? And something I do with teachers and with leaders of different organizations too is to share a story about why they do this work and what brought them there in the first place. Because we want to keep lighting that flame and sort of re-encountering it for its warmth, its light, its beauty, to remember why we're here. And then to put those faces and have those stories of the one life touched, the one small turnaround, it's all worthwhile. And in service work, we don't always see the results. We don't always see the change. We're in it like parents. You have to have the long view. You can't look at that teenager who in that trip to the police station or that in-house inspection as that. No, that's just an opportunity to grow. This is the moment to have the mentoring conversation and to let them know they're loved unconditionally. And so I don't know if I'm hitting the notes to answer this good question, but we do want to, in any mentoring situation, we want to put the mentee in the driver's seat. So asking good questions such as, tell me about who you'd like to be and why. Who are some people in your life you really admire? Can you share a story with me about that? So when they're in a particular struggle, how would you like to see this situation turn out? If you could wave a wand, what would it look like? And does that reflect the person you'd like to be? And we don't want to give any advice until we kind of really listen and kind of walk through. And I would say even before asking those questions, if they're in a crisis or a struggle, if we can reflect back to them, what I hear you saying is this. That sounds really difficult. And I appreciate that. It sounds like you're angry, sad, whatever the emotion is. And is that right? It's so important in a mentoring situation that we gauge, we practice that good reflective listening, and we know, are we in the right place? And then get them back to, or if we know something about who they aspire to be like, bring them back to that image of what they're aiming at, who they're aiming at, and then let them, so what's one small step you could take right now? And that's aligned with the best version of yourself. What would that look like? And then in the very, very last place, after we've sort of walked through some of these questions and we've really heard from them, then what kind of help might you need from me or from somebody else? Then we're structuring it and really allowing them to envision the possibilities.
Wonderful. So next question is about the importance of a good diet of literature. And in many ways that good literature is different from what students can watch on TV or maybe Netflix. From your perspective, is the medium able or unable to foster reflection and transformation in a way that good literature does? So can good TV do what a good book does?
No. Good TV can definitely inspire, edify, and motivate. And I'll tell you, my therapy of choice is all creatures great and small. When I just want to kind of recalibrate, that new series is just so beautiful, and does help me get into a perspective and a place of like, oh, what the resilience of the human spirit and what is possible in terms of relationships. And so it is very helpful. There's no question. Good drama is inspiring and artistic and is a beauty that can feed us and allow us to envision possibilities for ourselves. What reading does, there's a deeper engagement. There's a difference when I'm listening to a book on tape than when I'm reading it. When I'm reading it, I can linger on a passage. There's a different level of neuropsychological engagement. There's even a different level of engagement in terms of the quality of literature. And there have been functional MRIs done on readers of Jane Austen versus readers of like a romantic dime store beach novel. And the areas of the brain that are lit up in Jane Austen are more in the higher functioning prefrontal cortex areas of the brain. And I don't want to misspeak. I'm not a neuroscientist, but these studies do exist. So it is valuable insofar as when you linger and you look at a text and you can go back, there's a different kind of active thinking that contributes to staying power. And I know that I retain better things that I've read more than once, not just, just a cursory superficial reading. But I think what we're looking at is activating the whole person, right? And so if we are more passively engaged when we're watching something on television, when we're actively engaged, we're shaping our imagination on a deeper level. But I have no problem with the benefits. And I think it would be great to create film series and mini series that are conducive to discussion groups and schooling of desire exercises.
Great. This is a question from a group of high school students listening on their lunch break. Can you give me the top 3 things that I can do to be better at focusing on and developing practical wisdom?
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you for being here. You are rock stars. And I hope you can get another break later. You're having a good lunch. The 3 top things you can do is when you feel stressed or anxious or have a very strong reaction, is to remember to press pause and step away. And pick 1 to 3 things that help you recalibrate. Deep breathing, listening to, just 3 minutes of music, go for a walk, so that you create space between that desire to react in a way that might not be your best self, and the space that you need to kind of enter into some productive reflection and thinking. Okay, so that's the first thing. Know yourself and have some recalibration tools. And sometimes it might be sleep, it might be protein. The second thing is to know that when something is big, complicated, and messy, could be a personal problem or just a multi-step research paper that you have to do. Again, recalibrate, step away from that first reaction, and then say to yourself, okay, what am I aiming at? What do I know? What do I need to know? And who can help? Do I need to have a conversation with the teacher just about my plan? Do I need to sit with a study group just to make a plan and just spend 10 minutes minimum? You don't have to spend 3 hours, like just answering those questions so that you can set yourself up for wise, practical action going forward, because it might be on that list. I need to go speak to so-and-so who's going to give me good advice like this. Maybe I need to have a conversation with my mom or dad. Maybe I need to think or pray about this, whatever is needed, but just give yourself 10 minutes to do that. Then you'll move into that space of dynamic, practical thinking, deliberation, planning, and work. Because what you're aiming at the end of the day is decisions and actions that bring out the best in yourself and others. You are aiming at action, but good action, the best action. And then the third is let go of the poison of perfectionism. It is very deceiving, and it's better to try something, to seek advice from someone, even though we're afraid of sounding silly or stupid. We're not. Stay curious, stay really curious, seek that help, and don't define yourself down by creating impossible goals that you can't reach, and have fun.
That's the important part. One final question before we wrap up. Is there something you're currently reading that you would recommend to the audience?
Yes, I am. I'm reading Viola Davis. becoming me or finding me. Gosh, I'm sitting here, I wasn't prepared for this question, so I think it's the memoir autobiography of the actress Viola Davis. Highly recommend it. It's a powerful story of courage and resilience, and really transformation, a lot of personal transformation, incredible family relationships, the importance of a career. You get narrative practice and tradition well dramatized. And I do recommend actually the audiobook version of it, because Viola Davis is a phenomenal actor and her reading of it is quite moving. But I need the book because there's passages I want to go back to because I don't want to forget. And they're a real inspiration to me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. And thank you so much for joining us over this hour. Thank you to the audience. Please join us again on Monday, April 17th with Dave Evans, the founder of the Stanford Life Design Lab and co-author of the best-selling book, Designing Your Life. Thank you so much, Karen. This has been such a treat.
Thanks for having me, Suzanne.